This is MBA 4, Gulu 1 presentation. Public-private partnership group coursework. Today is the 9th of December, 2021. Allow me to introduce the group members. We have Mwa David, we have Aloyo Tofista, we have Anena Monica, we have Okelo David Opiro, and we have Ayo Alice Ogal. We are going to look at the strategies that PPPs can adopt to increase their legitimacy in society. These are our discussion points. We are going to look at the definition of PPP, the meaning of legitimacy in PPP, why legitimacy is a concern in PPP, the examples of PPP projects in Uganda, and then lastly, the action point aimed at increasing legitimacy in society as our first part of presentation. We look at the definition of PPP. According to the World Bank, the term public-private partnerships, PPPs, has taken on a very broad meaning. The key elements, however, are the existence of a partnership style approach to the provision of the infrastructure as opposed to an arm's length suppliers relationship. Either each party takes responsibilities for an element of the total enterprise and they work together, or both parties take joint responsibility for each element A. PPP involves a sharing of risk, responsibility, and reward. And it is undertaken in those circumstances when there is a value for money benefits to the taxpayers. We look at the meaning of legitimacy in PPP. Legitimacy is a generalized perception or assumption that the actions of an entity are desirable, proper or appropriate within some socially constructed system of norms, values, benefits, and definitions, as presented to us by Chapman, 1995, when we read the page 574. We look at why legitimacy is a concern in PPP. Millward and Provan, 2000, suggested that legitimacy is a concern due to the fact that the PPP projects generally introduce private providers into services that have historically been publicly provided. PPPs require large financial commitments from private providers who are expecting a long-term return on a non-mobile asset. PPPs involve a huge amount of public funds. The effects of the means to achieve the public good or infrastructure is far-fetching. For example, the depletion or destruction of natural endowment, such as forests, or even relocation of communities. PPPs are long-term in nature, with long-term effects, with some effects irreversible. One way or another, the community meets part of the project costs. For example, the electricity, the tariffs, road tolls, and the like. We look at the examples of ongoing PPP projects in Uganda. We have Omeme Power Distribution Concession. We have the Rift Valley Railways Concession. We have Kampala Serena Hotel Concession. We have Bujagali Power Generation. We have Eskom Power Generation Concession. We have Kalangala Infrastructure Services Project. We have Nakawa Naguru Housing Project. And then we have Provision of Education Services, the UPE and USE. I now take this moment to invite the next discussant, my sister Aloyo Tofista, who is going to take us through the various actions from 1 to 6. My sister, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Father. Thank you for discussing, and all my fellow discussants. Thank you for those who are watching us. Here are the actions aimed at increasing legitimacy of PPPs in a society. Action number 1 is establish a clear, predictable, and legitimate institutional framework supported by competent and well-resourced authorities. The political leadership should ensure public awareness of the relative costs, benefits, and risks of public-private partnerships and conventional procurement. Also, key institutional roles and responsibilities should be maintained, for example, project monitoring by the community. And then ensure that all regulation affecting the operation of public-private partnership is clear, transparent, and enforced. For example, project phase duration is adhered to. Action number 2 is ground the selection of private-public partnerships or PPPs in value for money. All investment projects should be prioritized at senior political levels. This is done so because the current government usually takes the praise or the blame for the project. Carefully investigate which investment method is likely to yield the most value for money. Also learn to transfer the risk to those that can manage it best. For example, maybe the private service provider or the government. Those two can manage the risk better than the community. Action number 3, use the budgetary process transparently to minimize fiscal risks and ensure that the integrity of the procurement process is there. In this, make sure the Central Budget Authority should ensure that the project is affordable and overall investment envelope is sustainable. This should be in line with the government's fiscal policy. The project should be treated transparently in the budget process. And finally, the government should guard against waste and corruption by ensuring the integrity of the procurement process. Action number 4 is balancing interest, which is the most important action to note. According to El-Gahari, 2006, PPP stakeholders are individuals or organizations that are either affected by or affect the development of the project. These stakeholders have varying interest in the PPP. For example, the community might look at a potential job opportunity in an upcoming PPP. The government will support the community in this to gain state credibility and political support, whereas the private service provider may need qualified workers who may not be available in that community. So that's the dilemma of balancing interest in PPPs. A successful PPP program needs to overcome a number of inherent conflicts that arise with the private provision of infrastructure services. This entails ensuring that the interests of the 3 broad stakeholder groups are protected. This is in most cases very challenging, as we might all know. For example, setting tariffs at a level that is acceptable to all users will often not provide sufficient revenue and cash flow to make the project an attractive investment for the private providers. Now, let's remind ourselves that the 3 main stakeholders in a PPP, 1 is the government or the local government, 2 is the private service provider, and 3, the community. Our action number 5 is capacity building. In this, the government should use all means to scale up their capacity building based on an action plan at sub-regional, national, and international levels, all targeting the creation of effective projects based on people first principle. And dear people watching us, finally, we have development market providers. In this, please ensure that you take actions that attract private investment, including developing the domestic capital market. Take actions that sustain state credibility. Again, it's about balancing the interest and of the PPP stakeholders. Publish guidance materials for the benefit for private sector organizations. Thank you so much for watching, and back to you, Father. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, our sister Aloyo Tofista, for such a wonderful presentation. We are going to look at the key issues to be considered for the successful undertaking of market soundness in the PPP cycle. Our points of discussions are as follows. We are going to look at the meaning of market soundness in PPP, the purpose of market sounding, the market soundness objectives, the various stages of PPP, and then the key considerations for market soundness in each of the PPP stages. And with this, I invite the next discussant, which will be our sister Ayo Alice Ogal. She will present to us the meaning of market sounding and the purpose. You're welcome.
Good evening, Father, my fellow members. Let me go straight away to defining what market soundness in PPP is. Market sounding is a specific function and role for consultation with the private sector during the project stages. Furthermore, market sounding focuses on the suitability and attractiveness of the business scheme and generates inputs and requirements from the potential partners as a whole. An effective market sounding exercise provides an opportunity for a structured dialogue between the private and the public sectors at the early stages of the PPP process. The main purpose of this step is to get some initial feedback from the market on the feasibility of the proposed PPP project. Relevant basic information on the project is provided to the interested parties, which may include the type of services to be procured and the demand for such services, type of PPP deal, likely tenure of contract, obligations of the parties in broad terms, revenue sharing arrangement, financing, and exit arrangements. Let's look at the market soundness objectives. Market sounding involves gathering knowledge which is focused in these key areas. 1, viability. Whether the proposed business scheme is actually viable or has it ever been done. 2, capability. Will the private sector, individual or in consortium, be able to achieve the requirements? 3, capacity. Whether the market have the capacity to achieve what is required quickly enough and with large enough scale. Maturity. Whether there is an established market. My dear fellow participants and viewers, this is my presentation, and I would like to invite my next discussor who will take us through the various stages of PPP. Welcome, Monica.
Thank you so much, Alice. Good evening, viewers and fellow participants. I'll look at the various stages of the PPP. Below the stages from 1 to 6, I will go straight to stage 1. That is the project identification and PPP screening. Here we shall look at the features of the project identification processes and how to assess the suitability of the project for PPP delivery. Also, we shall explain the need for the PPP project appraisal and preparation. There are key issues that needs to be considered under the first stage, and one is comply with the applicable laws, and these laws include the export control law, the sanction law, and the human trafficking laws, and the rest. Then issue 2, then produce a rank list of assessed projects that can be considered as potential PPP projects. Then we shall also consider the various PPP project assessed at this stage as being the value for money. Then also prioritize the PPP project as they assessed for readiness to progress to the next stage for the feasibility study. Then last one, then we look at consider the project that are ready and are proposed to the line ministry for its approval for the contracting agency to undertake as much more detailed study. Stage 2 of this, we shall look at appraising the PPP project. Here we'll consider the approaches that the PPP project and then preparing which will include the introduction to the command, analyzing, and then other related analysis that should be undertaken before any decision are made by the government to invest in and procure the PPP project. To consider this, there are issues also that needs to be taken, and one, conduct a sound social cost-based analysis, which will measure the social and budget. Number two, consider the sound financial analysis. And then number three, conduct environmental impact analysis. Conduct social impact study, which will include the resettlement issues. Establish the PPP modalities and the business scheme. Then lastly, conduct a risk assessment, which will include the preliminary allocation of the risk. Stage three, we'll have structuring and drafting of tender and contract.
So under
the revenue and payment mechanism, the most common and advisable approaches to risk allocation, and the key requirements for the request of the qualification and the request for proposal, as well as we shall explain how to incorporate the contract structure and tender strategy into the tender packages. There are key issues that we'll also need to consider when drafting the tender and contract. One, be clear about the process to be used. Two, involve invest in time in prepare, give it your time, work on the documentation. Then avoid using jargons, and then be clear on the issues to be discussed. Then have the tender careful review. Yeah, you need to review, and the people who need to review, they should be team from the legal background and then the technical team to help you support the proposal. Thank you so much. Let me hand over to my next colleague, that is David.
Yes, thank you, Monica. Thank you, fellow members. I'm David Moore. I will take over from stage 4. Under stage 4, this is tendering and awarding of the contract. This stage describes the main challenges and needs for managing the tender process up to executing the contract beyond the regulation settled in the tender package. The key market soundness issues to be considered are: first, you have to consider the use of the one-on-one format with the organizations. Be sensitive to the fact that they might not be at ease with the process that involves simultaneous discussions with 2 or more partners in business. And then also reassure all parties that no one is being singled out for special treatment in any subsequent procurement. Do not waste time receiving sales pitches. Spend some time finding out what the market thinks of the PPP proposal, for example, through organizing workshops and print media. The next stage, that's stage 5, managing the contract. That involves the strategy, the delivery, and commissioning. This stage explains the need for and importance of a proactive contract management strategy, the main features of contract management functions, and the main challenges of contract management during the construction phase of the PPP project. The key market soundness issues to be considered are: don't restrict the scope of the market sounding anyway. For example, mount a vigorous public outreach and public participation campaign with extensive media coverage to explain the project benefits, the costs, and the tax and the tariff systems to the beneficiaries or to the citizens. This is aimed at gaining acceptance and building consensus among the public. 2, all the detailed discussion with the project team about the PPP project, for example, the construction of railways. Be clear of the roles of the private investor, the government, and the public. And the last stage, managing the contract, and here we look at the operations and earning back to the government. This stage describes the main challenges of and the particularities of contract management during the operating phase of the contract, up to and including the earning back of the assets upon the expiry of the contract. Here, the key market soundness issues to be considered are: involve more than one individual on the side of the public authority, and be consistent about what you say to respondents. Always ensure that meetings are documented and shared timely. Do provide market information and feedback. For example, obtaining feedback from private sector and public on concerns, issues, and also conditions required for the sectors in the transactions. Thank you. Next, further.
Yes, thank you, David Moore, for such a wonderful presentation. From all our discussions and presentations above, we were able to draw a conclusion that PPPs are long-term relationship between the public and private sector to deliver an output or performance. It has been proven that the public-private partnerships posit enormous benefits for the government and its citizens. However, when we look at the PPPs that are largely critiqued for disregarding public interest in their operations, to ensure sustainability of the projects, it is very important and critical for PPPs to identify and adapt strategies that increases their legitimacy in society. It is important also to ensure that market soundness in the PPP cycle is well planned. This is our conclusion. I want to sincerely thank all the group members for a wonderful presentation. May God bless you. Thank you.